So last week I had a chance and a great pleasure to drop into the CrossFit Games and see our friends kind of hanging out. And I witnessed a phenomenon that's happening more and more in our GPP fit community. So the phenomenon that I witnessed was that I saw a bunch of young, superstar, very fit kids jump into the kayak and do the paddle. Hang on a second. It's not a critique about paddling technique. It was a fact that I witnessed one of the athletes who did very, very well end up with some considerable chafing on her glutes, on her ischial tuberosities, and on her heels. And it's a phenomenon that, one, is that she was using excellent technique and driving through the boat, but really that chafing was a result of lack of tissue exposure. So what we're seeing is, many times many of us used to be limited in how much work we can do because we weren't very strong, we weren't very skilled, we weren't very fit. And in the last decade, we've seen a generation of athletes embrace GPP and sports preparation training and develop these sort of generalist, big horsepower engines that they can actually go out and perform a lot of work. But as we're transitioning back into the phenomenon of getting back outside and playing more, the same group of people, especially when they come back to a sport that they potentially haven't done for a while, are actually getting themselves into trouble. What am I talking about? Well, they are using that fitness and that engine, but they don't have the tissue tolerance to manage it. They haven't had the exposure, and exposure is really the word, and that so many of our issues, musculoskeletally, come around from lack of exposure. So sometimes, at least what we're trying to do in the gym, is say, hey, is this a position or a shape I can manage and at least touch so that I can keep myself mechanically sound, under load, under tension when I fatigue? Hey, I'm going for a way to ski with my friends or going for the big bike ride. But there's no substitute for actually doing your sport and having some small exposure to that sport. So here I am training for a paddling trip coming up in early September, and I have been paddling for 35 years. I've been paddling a long, long time. But going out and getting some reps in on the paddle, I end up wearing a hole and just creating a blister, right? I'm not trying to be hyperbolic here, but this is a place where I've had a callus for decades and decades from holding a kayak paddle. But more and more, I'm riding my bike and paddling less. So I have all of this motor memory and all of this technique built in and a pretty fit engine. And guess what? I went right through the tissue tolerance of my hand. So what I'm trying to say is, don't confuse your considerable fitness with the exposure that you're required to go do some of these big events. Some friends recently rode a 24-hour mountain bike race, and they were shocked at how raw and chafed their butts were because they weren't used to sitting on a saddle. But they do a lot of assault biking. So keep in mind that ultimately exposure rules. And if you know something's coming up, start to dose your exposure so you give your ligaments, your tendons, your joints, and more importantly, even your skin, a chance to adapt. That way, you won't be caught flat-footed by all the work you can do with that fitness in positions and shapes and sports that you may not touch very often.